You're watching Good on Paper, a bookish channel. I'm Jenny.
And I'm Rachel.
Join us as we journey together into the land of fiction, where the men are brave, the quests are epic, and everything is better on paper. Hi, everyone!
Hello!
We are back, and today we're going to be talking about writing rules and when or why you should break them. We're not going to be discussing all writing rules, but just a few of the more controversial rules that it's a little up in the air about whether you should follow them or not. You know, sometimes you might want to, sometimes you might not. So let's dive in and get started.
Yeah, I Googled a bunch of different writing rules. I Googled just like some writing rules and then some that were just like breakable or ridiculous or whatever. And some of these are my own opinion that they should be broken. So let's go through the list and see what we think of each of them. So the first one, and this is a pretty old school writing rule that I think most people have heard of, but it's never open with the weather. So never have your opening scene start describing the weather.
Which is interesting that it is an old school writing rule because most books of 1800s, 1700s, I think did this.
Start with the weather.
They really do.
Yeah. Yep.
And that could be why that rule came about is because, these masters of literature did it, right, in the classics. And then people read the classics. And I'm thinking, I don't know, it's the 50s or something now. And people are reading these classics. And then you get all these writers who are newer to the craft or maybe not that great. And they're like, oh, I'm going to start with the weather. But when they do it, and then also books back in the day, I think were a little more slower paced. So I think in the 1800s, you could get away with that. Today, you are not Jane Austen, you are not Tolstoy, you are not Dickens. So you probably shouldn't start with the weather unless you have a very good reason of doing so, which I can definitely think of some examples where you might want to.
Yeah. I feel like for the most part, it seems like in a lot of ways, writers or readers back then, you described so much more. You set up the scene, what was the weather like, and now readers are expected to kind of just know. Like they don't spend as much time describing things. You don't spend time talking about what the weather. Most of the time, you even know what the weather is in a scene. So it's interesting because then like they set up everything for you in the scene, and then now it's like we just assume the reader knows the basic stuff, and we just skip to the meat of the story.
Yeah,
which I kind of like because it's faster. But
yeah, it's all action, and I think it depends. So if you are third grader, it was a very sunny day in blah blah blah, and the sky was blue blah. So that's why that rule is there, because people do write like that sometimes. You know what I mean? A lot of times it's younger kids or new writers. They all start with it was warm that day. But now if you are writing Wuthering Heights and you want to start with the description of the fog on the moor, that's a good example of when to start with the weather, because in a book like Wuthering Heights, I don't think it starts out like that. I don't remember how it starts. But if you're writing something like that where the location and the weather is basically a main character in the story, it plays such a big role, because the moors and the fog is a huge role in Wuthering Heights. It makes sense to start with it because it is important to the story. And it's like the central theme.
Or even like if you're writing a pirate story and you want to start out talking about a storm and the way the ocean is twisting and turning and stuff, because you're setting up this really big opening moment, that would make sense. But if you're just telling us that it's nice outside or that it happens to be raining today, if it doesn't set up the story in some way, it's probably not a great way to start the story. But if it does set up the story, then it makes sense.
Yeah, because the pirates, you could be having that storm because you want to show how they deal with the storm. You can say that it's a nice day because maybe that opening chapter ends up being the worst day in the life of that character. And, you're juxtaposing the fact that it was a nice day.
Yeah.
And why did it have to be such a nice day? Now it's ruined. So if you're doing it for a reason, I think it's fine. But it really doesn't make sense as a rule. I mean, they should just say, don't put in unnecessary stuff that doesn't belong in your story. Not don't start with the weather. I mean,
like just the rule should be no boring beginnings. End of story.
Yeah. Because if the weather is important and interesting in your story, then go ahead and start with it. Like,
Yeah.
or important and interesting in that opening scene, I would say. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%.
Yeah. So,
Okay,
moving on to the next rule.
The second one is one I'm sure a lot of us have heard, and it's avoid prologues, which is a dicey one. People have different opinions about that.
Oh, yeah. This one gets heated.
Yeah.
So
I personally don't have a problem. Yeah, same.
Yeah. I really love prologues. I feel like, well, because in movies do prologues all the time. They have like their little short shot, and then the credits will roll. You know. Like,
I would say
so
the only time. What?
No, you go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say the only time I don't think I like it is if you're gonna give like an info dump via a prologue. Like you're gonna set up the entire world via a prologue. I'm like, I'm not listening. The only time that works is in a movie because I can see it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I know, and I was about to say the exact same thing. And once again, this is not the rule. Really, just should be don't write badly, because if you're writing a prologue and you're just info dumping in it and you're giving us all this unnecessary information that we don't need to know, then no, you shouldn't write a prologue. But if you write a good prologue, then you should write a prologue.
Yeah.
This is probably the most confusing thing for all writers everywhere, but that really is, I guess, writing rules.
I feel like actually a good example to me is the first Lord of the Rings movie has a prologue where they set up the world of Lord of the Rings and they set up the history, which makes sense for a movie because they skip out on so much of the meat in the movie from the book. But I would never do that in a book because it would just be so dry and boring. However, the prologue of the third movie is Gollum's origin story, where he finds the ring and he commits murder. That's a great prologue to write in a book because it introduces an interesting character. It's kind of jarring. It's different. It sets you right into the world. You want to know what's going on. That would be fine in a book, but just giving an info dump doesn't make sense as a prologue for a book. Yeah.
Well, and my favorite kind of prologues are one that take a side character who probably never comes back in the book, or maybe does, but as a side character, and it takes an event that ends up being crucial to the story, like, by the midpoint or later. So we have, an example I'm thinking of is in the first Game of Thrones, we start with this random knight who goes into the north where all those like creepy frozen people or like those dead people are walking around. Anyway, they're basically zombies. It's a zombie movie. So he goes in and they all get killed by those things. And then the whole central theme of the book is these walkers are spreading throughout. So this is kind of like a catalyst. But so we have that prologue and then we just leave it there. We never come back to it. And we go on to the happy Stark's life. We go to the Shire, we go to wherever. So you as a reader get a taste of, something bad is coming.
Yeah.
And you just tease them with it. And then you go to everybody's normal, happy life, frolicking in the countryside, and they don't know it's about to hit them. Like that, to me, that is when you should do a prologue. Like, if you've got like kind of a good thing that you can do there. And I always really like it when prologues have like a character like Gollum, like who's not like a main character. You know what I mean?
Or if you do single POV for the book, but the prologue is in the POV of the person that never gets a POV later in the book. Yeah. So you at least get to set up their headspace, and then you go into the book and they never have a POV again. That would make sense to me.
Or another kind of prologue that I really like. Well, I don't know if it's called a prologue. So it's in the book I'm reading right now. So these books work well for like a narrative style. So first person, like old fashioned feel. So the one I'm reading is the Secrets of Heartwood Hall. So it's like a gothic in the style of Jane Eyre or something. So it's a narrative. It's somebody's telling what happened to me at Heartwood Hall. So it starts off with her reminiscing about these are the things I will never forget about Heartwood Hall. And then it goes into all this dark, like this person whispering over here and the sound of gunshots and blah, blah, blah. And then you move on and it starts at the beginning. So sometimes it's nice if you're doing a very kind of like narrative, old-fashioned kind of book to start with like the person who's telling the story, like their little reminisce, and then you start at the beginning with them. That's
Yeah.
another way I'd
Yeah.
like to read them.
Yeah, that reminds me of the beginning of Twilight, which is it a prologue or is it a preface when you do that? Where
Yeah, I
the
think
beginning
it's
of Twilight starts with the moment she has at the end of the book. It's just set in the beginning, and you don't know what it's about. Yeah.
Yeah, that's always really well done too. Or
Yeah.
it can be really well done. It's very good when it's well done. That's what I mean
I think
to
all
say.
of these rules can be broken when they're well done, and when they're not well done, then
Yeah. But then it's like, well, how do you know when you're doing that is the hard part about writing is when is it well done and when is it not? Because sometimes you really can't tell if it's your
and
own
I think
writing.
that's where reading a lot and watching a lot, you learn based on what you see. You're like, oh, okay, that example was good and that example was bad. I understand now why that one was bad. Yeah.
Yeah, you can't learn to write from these rules because they really don't make sense. The only rule in writing is you need to write bad and you need to not, or you need to write bad. No, the only rule in writing is you need to write well and you shouldn't write bad.
Yeah.
That's it. You can do whatever you want as long as you write well, and you can't do anything if you're writing badly.
Yeah.
Like
100%. That's the there you go. That's the summary of this episode.
Yeah.
Okay, here's a really basic one that I know we all feel this way, but I often feel like we overdo it. Never use the word suddenly.
Yeah.
Listen, sometimes it's the word that makes sense. Like I get that it's overused, but if you don't overuse it, it's actually an appropriate word to use.
Yeah. And if you start a sentence off with suddenly, I feel like that's when it gets a little dicey, especially if you're doing it a lot. Suddenly, sometimes. But if you're saying, if it's used in the middle of a sentence, or, there's more elegant ways of phrasing something or narrating something, having your main character narrate than just saying suddenly, which it's hard. I get it. Like that, honestly, the part in my one book that I've been working on forever that is like the worst part, and it's like ingrained in my mind, is when she's foraging in the forest, and all of a sudden, suddenly, 3 horsemen ride through. I'm always like, how do I get this to like happen suddenly? Like, how do I say that? Like, she's picking fire, and then like a loud crash is heard in the, like, how do you say that?
Yeah.
Like, oh my
I totally understand. Yeah. I feel like if you use it sparingly, I feel like it's a perfectly appropriate word to use. Because sometimes, you could be more creative about it, but sometimes it's like, listen, man, this part of the story does not call for a long descriptive scene or something to explain the suddenly. Like, let's just say suddenly.
Yeah. Because sometimes people do suddenly do things, or things suddenly happen, and that's just what happens.
Yeah. Yeah. That one's a pretty simple one, but okay, this one, avoid detailed descriptions. This is definitely, I think, a preference one.
Yeah, because it depends on what you're writing. If you are writing a really action-heavy book, then yes. But if you are writing something that's slower, and then it depends on what you're describing. Like, is it something that's important to the story?
Yeah.
Are we seeing it through the character's eyes? So when you're describing it, are we getting information about the character and how they see the world?
Yeah.
So, like, if a character is looking at a river, again, I think I'm going to take another example from Game of Thrones, because I think that's because I read those books when I was writing a lot and learning a lot about writing craft, and I would just notice the way he did things. I'd be like, that's really good. So another one I noticed is they're riding along, and I don't even remember what character this is, but he sees a stream winding by. And so we get the description of the stream, but we're also getting the way he feels about the stream, a certain memory that happened there with his older brother that he doesn't really like with the stream, or it's probably not even his older brother. I think I know which character I'm thinking of, and I don't think it's that, but it's something along those lines. So, yes, you're getting the description of the stream, and then they go into town, and you're getting the description of the town. But within the description is mingled how this character views these things, the things that have happened to him in his past, and how that affects his relationship with other characters. So, and I was reading that description for maybe like 2 pages. They're just
Yeah.
writing along, describing stuff. But it was integral to the plot and to the character development of the story.
Yeah. Yeah.
So in that case, yes, you should do lengthy descriptions, but you
Yeah.
shouldn't do a lengthy description of just an object that has no meaning whatsoever.
Yeah.
To the character or the story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you have to trust the readers a little bit that they can imagine the gist of what you're talking about. And remember that no matter how perfectly you describe it, somebody will imagine it incorrectly based on your description. Like, you could say that this character looks this way, and they will still imagine them differently than the way you described them, because once it's in your mind, it's just in your mind.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, so it's not like don't describe things. It's just, I would say don't waste a lot of real estate on the page on a description, especially like you said, if it's not integral to the story. Like if they're not going to be in that place ever again, or if it's not a place we're really going to remember, why do we need to know what it looks like? Or if it's like if I'd say that my characters are going to go into a Walmart, I'm not going to tell you what a Walmart looks like because you know what a Walmart looks like,
Exactly.
But this house you've never been to before, I might tell you what it looks like. And I also have read that you should not have your character describe themselves physically by looking in the mirror.
I hate when that
because it's like there are so many more creative ways to do it. Like, I like to put like character descriptions along with actions. Like she drew her blonde hair up into a ponytail. Like there you go. Now the reader knows she has blonde hair. Congratulations. You don't need to spend 10 minutes telling me what kind of blonde it is or whatever,
And you really don't need to. When it comes to character descriptions, instead of going through a whole paragraph of the laundry list of what they look like, sprinkle in, the hair, probably the eye colors, and then maybe like one other distinguishing feature. And if it's a side character, you can even just do like one distinguishing feature and then you let the reader paint the rest of the picture. So I might do the hair color at one point, eye color another point, and then from first meeting a character, I might do something like they have a really big hook nose.
Yeah.
Like that one detail or something about the way they walk or like just something so that the reader gets like a good like one thing to like anchor the character on in their mind, and they'll fill in the rest. Like don't say, okay, their nose looked like this, their mouth looked like this, their eyes look like this, they wore this clothes, their body type was this. Like your reader will fill in the rest.
Especially if it's a side character and you're not going to see them all the time, you really need to give them one distinguishing feature so they can remember which character that was.
Yes.
Like, like for one of my characters, I was like, listen, she has brown hair and brown eyes, but the thing you need to know is she always dresses professionally. There you go. That's the thing that sets her apart from the other 7 characters in the room, because they all start to look the same to the reader if you don't set them apart. But I would agree, just like the few basic things that like if the police were looking for you, they would have like 4 descriptors of you. Those are the things your reader needs to know. They can fill in the blanks. Yeah.
And you don't have to give it all at one time. Like spread it out. Like you do not have to go through the hair, the eyes, and their freckles at the same time. You can like kind of sprinkle it.
Yeah.
But because doing that mirror thing, I will tell you guys, there have been so many books that I have looked at the free sample on Kindle for. And I think, I just did like one of those big like free book giveaways. They had one and it was like, I'm like, how did I come up with so many examples of this? But there was one day where I was going through and looking at all the free books, and I would go on, I clicked on like their first pages, and there was at least 10 on the very first page.
Oh, wow.
Main character looks in the mirror. I mean, this is a free book giveaway, and a lot of times the books that are given away for free are like not the greatest. And the main character is like looking in the mirror and like describing themselves. And I was like, nope, okay, this is what I don't need to get.
Oh my gosh.
Free. So yeah, that is definitely a big one.
Yeah.
Like people do notice that, and they don't.
That's like my biggest pet peeve that I see in books all the time, and it makes me cringe every time, is it'll be like walking, running, riding, whatever. It'll be like, it felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. And I'm like, the number of times I've heard that cliche sentence written, and I'm like, I hate it, because I'm like, there's such a better way to say this. Like, seriously? This is literally the same phrasing I read in the book yesterday. I don't know why it bugs me so much. I know it's not a big deal, but it bugs me.
It's once you start noticing it,
Yes.
And then like, because you know the one that's really popular, though I never noticed this before either, but the one that people are always making fun of is she let out a breath she didn't realize she was holding. People make so much fun of that one. It's like, I'm writing YA, but I'm not putting that sentence in there.
Oh my gosh.
It's like all YA books do that.
Whenever somebody, and I promise I'll get to the next rule, but just one more. Whenever somebody writes that somebody growled, and everyone gets mad because they're like, "Oh, do people don't really growl?" And I'm like, my boss, one of my former bosses read my book, and he comes up to me and he goes, "I don't understand, Rachel." He goes, "She growled and then she snarled. Like, what do people really do that?" And I was like, "Oh, make me mad, Bob. Make me mad, Bob, and I will. Yeah. I growl and I snarl. I kid you not, regularly. Yeah. I do. So it is a human thing to do."
I think that's again one of those that should be used sparingly for like a certain kind of character. Like if all your characters are doing it, I would say no. But like, you know, if you have like a really gruff, grumpy boss type character,
yeah,
like then maybe he growls, or like maybe like there's this one girl who's always like hangry in your book. Like that could be her thing. You know, she's growling. Yeah. I don't know. You know, like when she gets hangry, like she's like a feral animal almost.
Oh my gosh, I love that. That's awesome. Okay, next one is not to have any inessential words.
Well, but now that is a really tricky one, because what's inessential? Like what is essential and what is not, and who's the judge of that? Like
I think that depends on the reader and the writer, yeah.
Yeah. Because some people write very sparse, short sentences, like short words, not, you know, and that's their style. So it depends on your style. So I would say don't include any inessential words for your particular style. So you have to know what your style is. And then you can see, because I have a generally wordier style, but when I go through and edit, I'm like, okay, I don't need that word. I don't need that word. I don't need that word. But some words, okay, maybe I don't really need, but like it's the flow. It's like the cadence and like how I write, you know?
Yeah.
So
I agree. Like there was a sentence I was writing earlier. It was something like she was going to set this down on the ground. And I thought, no. We don't need down. She just set it on the ground. Who says down on the ground? She just set it on the ground. Exactly. Like it doesn't seem like a big deal, but it is.
Or those like kinds of things, I think. And the B and stuff like that. Those,
oh my gosh. Of the time go. Another one for me. I know this is a personal preference, but when people write the correct grammar all the time, like they say that this person was going to go to the movies, or I would like to have this, instead of saying I'd like to have this.
No contractions. Like in dialogue or in narration?
Especially in dialogue. In narration, it bugs me a little bit, especially in dialogue. I'm like, who says I would like to have an ice cream? Nobody says that.
See, to me, that's just bad dialogue. Like,
I'm like, this slows it down.
Yeah, unless you're writing like historical fiction, but even then, I would caution you, pick up a Jane Austen book. They're always saying this thing that is something like ain't. Instead of saying are not, it's A-N apostrophe T. It is so common, and granted, it's more characters like Lydia who says stuff like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I also don't like when you're reading a Regency and like the language is very stiff. I'm like, okay, people didn't just talk grammatically.
Yeah.
Like they just think, oh, if I just use very grammatic proper English, it will sound like, you know, the early 1800s.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, go read Jane Austen, see how they talk. Like they used contractions, they did all this kind of thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, bad dialogue, that is a big one. Like
that is, and I read it all the time. I'm like, oh, that just sounds. You just made the whole interaction stiff, because who would really say it that way, you know? Yeah. So yeah, I would say, as far as inessential words, it depends on what kind of words we're talking about. But if it affects your flow, I say you can keep it. But if it slows it down, or if it feels unnatural, it should go. Yeah. And the other one is like polar opposite. Don't write incomplete sentences.
Oh yeah. See, that's like for essay writing. You can do that for like dramatic emphasis. People do that all the time.
And I think too, it depends on what decade we're talking about, because I think it's only been like somewhat more recently that it's been more a thing to write
and now you have to
purposefully
do it.
incomplete sentences. Yeah, like it's like you don't just write a sentence, you have to parcel it out so that it gets the right, like, almost emphasis on each part.
Yeah.
Kind of thing. Like it's a style now, and I feel like it didn't used to be a style. Yeah.
And like having things on one line, like an incomplete sentence,
Mhm.
and like
Yeah.
or like a bunch of sentences each on their own line, like that is definitely a modern style. But yeah, that's how you write these days, and you should write like that. I mean, unless you're doing something vastly different, then
Yeah.
But I would say that you want to do those things in your writing now. Like
I would
because that's how
say
books are written.
I would say to do it sparingly, like don't do it constantly, because you want it to have emphasis at the right moments.
Exactly. Yeah.
So if you're doing it all the time, it kind of loses value versus like, you know, if you're trying to have this flirtatious moment between two characters, for her to have an incomplete sentence of and then he looked at me or whatever, and you have it on its own line, it's an incomplete sentence, that's fine because you're trying to make a point of this is a big deal or whatever. But if it's constantly all the time, then it just kind of loses the point of it.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. Because it's for dramatic emphasis.
Yeah.
Dramatic and emphasis. So you can't do it all the time. Like,
yeah.
emphasis can't be all the time, and neither can drama. Like it needs to stick out.
I've seen people do all of these things. But like you said, I feel like it's kind of bad writing. Yeah. Or maybe they just they haven't played around enough and figured it out yet.
Yeah.
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 Okay.
Yeah. Again, guys, moral of the story, don't write bad. Or badly. I should say don't write badly. But again, this is how people talk. We don't speak grammatically correct all the time. There's vernacular English and then there's written English.
Yeah.
Then again, you do not want to write dialogue exactly as people talk, because that's a big no-no either. You should read a lot of books and see how dialogue is written.
Yes.
And go with that, because there's kind of a middle ground with the way people actually talk, what's grammatically correct, and then what is like the dialogue format kind of for books, and how a realistic character of today speaks or a realistic character of the past speaks. I mean, there's a way to do it, and there's a style.
Yeah. Totally. 100% agree, but definitely read books. That will help you learn a lot of things. Okay, 2 more. All adverbs and adjectives are unnecessary. And I mean, I wouldn't say that people think this, like all adverbs and adjectives are unnecessary, but people have a lot of beef with adverbs and adjectives.
Oh, yeah. And I would say probably like the adverbs more so, because those are like the lead words, right? Now I sound like a total disgrace to my profession, but an adverb is like the lead words, like quietly, softly. Yeah. Yeah. Adverbs are like, people get really heated about adverbs.
They do.
I think, you know who I think started that? I think it was Stephen King. Stephen King's style is not to use adverbs, so he doesn't like them. And he said that. But like people like J.K. Rowling use them all the time.
Yeah.
And that works with her style. And granted, she doesn't like overdo it. You know,
like
if you're overdoing it, then that's bad writing. That's not a case of you using adverbs. It's just you being a bad writer. Like,
I don't think, because I had somebody tell me from a place, I think they were trying to be helpful, but they took the liberty of looking through my first chapter of my first book and told me all of the times that the adverb should have been removed. And I was like, just because you have beef with them doesn't mean I have beef with them. I happen to like the flow they gave this particular sentence because of the cadence that it has now. Otherwise, it would just be this really stilted short sentence that just kind of feels wrong. So I like it. Like it's either just don't do it badly, just don't do it too much, and you're fine. But it's a personal preference. If it suits your style to use adverbs, use adverbs. If it doesn't, then don't. Yeah.
Yeah. And you know, when Stephen King said that, I don't know. I'm sure he uses adverbs occasionally, but I think it's his personal style. Although, for all I know, it's not even Stephen King who said this. It might be another writer, but let's just pretend it's Stephen King for now.
Yeah.
So he might not use them a lot, and he's probably thinking of like, 3rd grade stories. Okay, she said softly. Would you like to go to the store? He said, blah blah. And that does happen in a lot of like newer, inexperienced, young, whatever writers.
Yeah.
But an adverb handled with skill absolutely fine.
Yeah.
You know?
Like saying that they said it's. No, go ahead.
And I think people heard that, and now they think that you can absolutely have no adverbs in all, 50,000 words of your book. You can't, not one of them can be a single adverb, which that's not the point of the writing rule. Like, I don't even think Stephen King meant that.
No,
I don't think that's what he
that's
meant.
they probably, somebody just pulled that one quote and then started living by it, and so it became a thing. But I think it, like you said, like if it says like, oh, she said softly, yeah, that sounds really silly. But if like it's, okay, he whispered tenderly, like it can portray the emotions of the scene versus just, the way it sounded. We have one last one, and this is probably the most controversial one that there was on the list.
Oh no.
And I don't know what you're gonna think about it, but it's show, don't tell.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that is a controversial one, and for good reason, because sometimes you can't show all the time. That's the problem with that rule. It's a great rule, but you cannot be showing all the time. Sometimes you have to tell, because there is not enough room or attention span of the reader to show every little thing that happens. Sometimes you need to tell that one thing happened. But that you should be, I think when people say that, they mean your book should be mainly the actual action that's important to the story. So we start a chapter and we start right in the scene that is important. We don't start with what they had for breakfast that day. We start right when the action's going, and then we go through that scene and it's all action. And for the most part, it's showing. But sometimes you're going to need to tell, you're going to need to throw a backstory sentence or maybe a paragraph, like here or there, but you don't want to show that. Sometimes you need to just tell that and move on with the juicy stuff. Yeah.
I 100% agree. I think it's one of those things where the catchy phrase catches on, sure, but it doesn't really expand and tell you what that truly means. Because there are moments where you shouldn't tell me she's sad right now. She should look sad. I should see how she's reacting to this moment or whatever. But then there are also moments where I actually need an inner monologue to tell me how she feels right now, because I don't know how she feels right now. I need her to tell me that. But then with this new series I've been writing, I keep telling myself, because I read a book recently that was so good. It was The Off Limits Rule by Sarah Adams. It was really, really good. It's a rom-com. And I really liked the balance of funny and romance, and like the inner monologues were always interesting to listen to. And if there wasn't anything where I was like skimming it. And I was like, that's what I need to do with this. If it's not adding comedic relief, or because a lot of rom-coms is comedic relief in the inner monologue, or if it's not telling me additional information I didn't know, it shouldn't be there. Don't repeat things. Don't waste the reader's time. I feel like that's more the point with show, don't tell, is don't leave things in there that are unnecessary that could be shown better than they're being told. So with show, don't tell, I feel like it makes sense when you think about, like you've said, just don't do bad writing.
Yeah.
Just think about whether it's valuable or not. Yeah.
Yeah. And that really is. And I think what you said about it's just a catchy phrase, show, don't tell. It really is. Because now I'm thinking, I'm pretty sure it was Stephen King, and I'm pretty sure what he actually said was, the road to hell is paved with adverbs. That says nothing about don't ever use them. He's just saying that if you're throwing out a bunch of adverbs, that's well on the road to bad writing.
Yes.
But
that
some people have taken that so literally. If you use a single adverb in your book, they lose their minds. And now, should you say she said softly? Well, maybe you could say she whispered. That might be better. But sometimes said softly might work better. And then the example you gave, he whispered tenderly. That's different, because we know that he's whispering, but now we know that the whisper is tender. Like, sometimes you do need it. Yeah. And somebody would say, well, we should know that it's tender from the words. Well, okay. Yeah, and sometimes we do, but it's,
Yeah. And I feel like especially newer writers or younger writers, like the moral of the story to those people, I want to say, is like, no rule is a hard and fast rule. Really, just the recommendation is read a lot and go with your intuition. Is it working the way you're doing it right now? Is that really necessary, that word or that sentence or whatever? And go with what sounds actually the best.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So sorry, it is not easy, but such is life.
This is true. And you guys, if you signed up to be a writer, like, certainly not going to be easy. Sorry to tell you this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, let us know which of these rules you agree with. If there is any others that you either agree or disagree with, you can let us know in the comments on the YouTube video, or if you're listening on a podcast, you can always head over to our Instagram page and you can message us on the topic if you have more to say about it, or you can comment if we have a post about it.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's what we have for you today.
Yeah. And as always, if you guys have other things you want us to talk about, please let us know in the comments or on Instagram or somewhere so that we can create content you guys are excited about.
Yeah, well, we will see you next week.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Hey guys, thanks so much for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed it, and tune in next week for another episode. And if you enjoyed it, please consider leaving a review so that other people can find us, and we will see you in the future. Bye.